Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. This is the 24th of June, 2005, approximately 10 a.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, your date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Carl M. Fosco. I was born in Ticonderoga, New York in November 15th, 1947.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
I graduated from Ticonderoga High School in 1965, and I graduated from State University of New York at Cortland in 1969.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted into the Army.
Okay. When were you drafted?
In July 22nd, 1969. The reason I remember is that's when the moon, or men walked on the moon.
Oh.
And I was on my way to basic training, so I remember that.
Where was your basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about your basic and what you, how long it lasted, what were some of the things you did there?
Well, it was basic training. You know, every soldier is a infantryman first, and it was concentrated on infantry training, and it was all pretty much Vietnam oriented at the time. Most of the drill sergeants and cadre instructors were people who had come back from Vietnam. So we heard lots of things about Vietnam, and a lot of the training was revolved around that.
How do you think, in retrospect, when you got to Vietnam, this training, do you think you were ready for what you met in Vietnam?
As well as anybody could be, you know, as a, you know, just a young kid. You know, when you got to Vietnam, they put you through a 2-week Vietnam training course. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they told us was, you know, forget everything you learned in the States. And we just learned the basics out there from experienced soldiers at the time.
Mm-hmm. What kind of weapons were you trained on?
I was trained on the M14, the M16 rifle, the LAW, the light anti-tank weapon, 45, and M60 machine gun, grenades, stuff like that. I did my advanced training as a medic, however.
Oh, okay. Could you where did you go for your advanced training, and how long was that?
My advanced training was in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and it was a 10-week basic aid-man's course, they called it. And you learn basic first aid and, you know, how to treat combat wounds, deal with casualties, triage, stuff like that. How to call helicopters in, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find the training to be pretty realistic and thorough?
Oh, yes. Yeah. You were trained not only as a field medic, but you were trained to work in a hospital also. Mm-hmm. Everything from how to make a bed, believe it or not, to give shots, which we practiced on each other. Mm-hmm. With saline solutions, but and even some basic surgical techniques.
Mm-hmm.
How long was that training?
About 10 weeks.
Okay.
Now, when you completed that, were you promoted at all?
I was promoted to the rank of E2 out of basic training.
Okay.
When I finished my medic training, we were given a 30-day leave, and then we were sent right to Vietnam.
Okay. You weren't given PFC or a specialist for at that point?
When I got to Vietnam and assigned to a unit, they automatically promoted you to PFC if you were eligible.
Okay.
And that's when I got promoted.
Okay.
Okay. After your leave, where did you go? Where did you leave from to go to Vietnam?
We left from Oakland Army base, and then we flew out from. I'm not sure. It was an air base near there, but I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. The last vivid memory, I see the Golden Gate Bridge disappearing in the background. I remember that as at night when we left. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me we took the long way around. We went to Hawaii, and then Wake Island, the famous battlefield of World War II, mm-hmm. and then to Okinawa, and then down into Vietnam. It was about a 22-hour flight.
What was your sensation when you first arrived and got off the plane?
Well, as we came down near Vietnam, we were high altitude, of course, I looked down and I could see helicopter gunships, you know, they looked like little bees, but they were engaged in a combat mission. You could see rockets firing and stuff like that. And then we landed at Benoit Air Base, and of course, being new guys, we were, you know, kind of ran off the plane because we didn't know what was going on. And there were jet aircraft taking off, you know, loaded with bombs and things like that. And we got into the terminal, and the first thing we had to do was fill out customs forms for the, it's like we were tourists for the Vietnamese government, you know, declaring that we have anything with us or not with us, you know, stuff like that. It was kind of weird. Then there were and then the plane that we came in on was a big commercial airliner. They'd refueled it by then, and they were turning around, and there was probably 200 GIs going back to the States, and they were called aboard the plane. There was a big cheer from those guys, and then we were kind of saying, well, now what are we in for?
Okay, where did you go from the airport?
To the 90th Replacement Battalion. That was just, I think it was near Benoit. That's where all the new troops came in, and then you were assigned to your units from there. I was there about 3 days. And then I was assigned to a Combat Aviation Battalion up in Da Nang. Marble Mountain, actually, it was called. We shared it with the Marines.
Okay. Could you just describe your impressions when you arrived there and basic life there?
Well, at Marble Mountain, which I said I was near the big air base at Da Nang, I was assigned to call the 519th Medical Detachment. And it was a unit that supported the Combat Aviation Battalion. Actually, it was a rear echelon unit. I expected to go, you know, out into an infantry division or something, but I was assigned there, and we did flight physicals, and we provided general medical support, and occasionally went into a village to provide support for Vietnamese civilians. It was, you know, I had a shower every night. I slept in a bunk. We were mortared occasionally, and there was a couple attacks, but nothing really serious. It was fairly good, you know, life. And then we had a air cavalry troop attached to us, and they had an air rifle platoon. They needed a medic, and our commander was a doctor, and all the other medics were married, and I wasn't. So I got to go to the air cavalry troop, and that's when my combat experience in Vietnam began.
Did you volunteer for that, or did they just...
Well, they came to me and they said, you know, all the other guys are married, you know, and some of them had children, you know, we would like you to volunteer. I guess if I didn't, they'd have sent me anyway. But I said, okay, I'll go. And to tell you the truth, it was getting kind of boring, you know, there. You know, like a lot of young people, you're looking for a more sense of adventure. And so I went, and I was transferred. The cavalry troop was up in Quang Tri province.
How long had you been in country at that point?
About 6 or 7 months.
Okay.
And I extended my tour from 12 months to 14 months because if you did that and you had less than 150 days left in the Army, you could get discharged. So I wouldn't have to serve the full 2 years. So I went to the cavalry troop sometime in August, and I stayed there until the end of my tour duty until the end of February 1971.
Okay.
And that was a combat medic's job. And the first day I got there, I was quickly absorbed into the unit.
Now, this was the 17th Aircraft?
Third of the 17th Aircraft, yeah.
What was their call sign, do you recall?
Yeah, it's Charlie Horse.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlie Horse. And that same cavalry regiment is now in Iraq. And part of it was at Fort Drum.
What was it like going back and going into the combat zone now? How was it different?
Well, of course, the living conditions were much more primitive. We were on the end of an airfield is where we were. And we supported the 1st Brigade of the 5th Infantry Division, Mechanized Infantry Division. And we were just a few miles from the DMZ and just a few miles from the Laotian Border. And the first day that we went out, I went out with the unit. In the morning, one of our helicopters had gotten shot down, and we had to go in and get the crew out. And one was dead, and one was pretty seriously wounded, so I treated him. And then, you know, we got out of there very quickly. And that afternoon, another guy, one of the scout helicopters, one of the men got shot right through the eyes, took his eyes out. And I said to myself, is this the way it's going to be every day? Now, fortunately, it was not. You know, those just happened that day. We did a lot of our patrol action where the old Marine base was at Quezon. And we fought some, you know, firefights, basically, you know, pitched battles that lasted very short. The North Vietnamese army is what we were fighting. And we had a pretty big fight near a place called the Old French Fort, where the French had been on the old Route Colonial 9. And it wasn't easy a lot of times, but then there was a lot of times of just long, boring tedium. We did a lot of patrols, and then in and out, you know, stuff like that.
As a medic, what kind of weapon did you carry?
I carried an M16.
Okay. Anything else, a sidearm or?
No. I was assigned a sidearm, but I just didn't feel that it had what I needed. And as a medic, you had a choice. You could not even carry anything. But that meant somebody else had to be covering for you, even though they covered for me.
Right.
And just having the extra firepower. Because our rifle platoon only had about 25 men in it. And we usually went out in 6- and 7-man groups. So, you know, you needed all you could get.
Sure.
And so I carried an M16.
Did you wear anything on you that showed that you were a medic?
No. We were told not to do that. You were a target.
Now, how was the equipment that you had in the field? How would you rate it? Your medical equipment, were you able to have enough with you and take care of?
Yeah, you had, you know, of course there's plenty of medical supplies available, but it was left to kind of my judgment. And then of course there were another couple of medics in the unit, and you know, their experience in the field, and you know, what did they carry? And I had a separate medical kit I carried, so like a small rucksack. And in it I carried the bandages, because you're only going to give basic first aid. I had a bottle of saline solution if I had to give an IV, and just basic medical supplies. I carried morphine, and but you had to be very careful using that stuff, depending on type of wound. But mostly it's just basic medical supplies, because all you're doing is stopping bleeding. All you're doing is, if a guy got hit in the face or something, clearing an airway, and then he's on board a helicopter and gone to a medical facility real quick. So you weren't treating them for very long periods of time. And in the rear area, I was just I held sick call in the morning, and guys had various aches and pains and things like that. You know, give them aspirin or something like that. Or if they needed more medical care, there was a medical facility you could send them to. But as far as the equipment, the Army's pretty generous with that. I mean, there was never any shortages of medical equipment or any other type of gear.
Okay. Let's say someone was wounded. How long, I know it probably depended on the situation, between the time you called for a medevac helicopter and the time it came in, do you have an average time?
Very quick, you know, maybe within 5 or 10 minutes. We were engaged in a fight where one of our Kit Carson scouts got killed and another one got wounded. And these were North Vietnamese defectors who joined the Allied side. And we had to get out quick because it was just many more of them than there were of us, and they called in an infantry brigade to deal with that. Because that mainly was our mission, to start the fight, then get out, where they brought in the heavy troops later on. Anyway, we went back to the hospital in Quang Tri, and I was on board with the wounded guy. And it took us only about 15 minutes to get there. And the one guy was dead, the other guy survived. The kind of a funny incident, though, was that they wanted to give me a Purple Heart for cutting myself. They didn't realize I cut myself at first, but I used an M14 bayonet. It's because you had to open up a guy's clothing. You know, I had it sharpened on both sides. It's a bayonet about that long. And I could slice the clothing real quick with that while lying on the ground. You know, you didn't have time to take a pair of medical scissors and cut away and all that stuff. And when I did that, I cut my thumb. So when I got to the hospital, one of the medics in the hospital there came up and tagged me. You know, he said, well, you've been wounded, you know, and I was bleeding, because you bleed heavy in extremities
Yeah,
anyway.
right.
And I was bleeding all over the place. And he says, okay, I need some information for a Purple Heart. And I said, no. I said, I cut myself. Do not do this. You know, Purple Heart to the guys that deserve it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, of course, I made sure that didn't happen. Because, you know, it wasn't something I earned. I just did it myself.
Were you ever wounded at all?
No. Concussion a couple times, you know, from heavy shelling, but never hit by bullets or shrapnel or anything like that. I heard it fly over my head sometimes.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
You were involved in the Laotian crossing?
Yes, yeah, what they call that, Lam San 719 or something. Yeah, we actually it came near the end of my tour. I had about a month or so left, maybe a month and a half. And we knew something was going on because they were just moving in all sorts of supplies and heavy infantry and more helicopter assault companies. And but we were part of that invasion because we were the cavalry troop and we knew the area. So they sent us out first, and we actually, they say no American troops crossed into Laos at the time, but we did. And we held the hills where the North Vietnamese gunners had shelled the Marines because they didn't want them to move back in there. And gosh, I wish I'd thought of it. I got 8mm film actually showing, you know, I took it as we were crossing Khe Sanh into Laos. And there's a river right there. You can see where we, I wish I'd brought it with me because I've got a whole bunch of 8mm film I shot in Vietnam.
Oh.
Yeah, we'd like to be able to copy that.
Because somebody mentioned something to me about bringing some things like that. I looked for pictures this morning. I couldn't find them, but I just thought of those 8mm films. Well, off camera here, maybe we can make an arrangement and we can bring them down.
Had you known of any American units that had crossed into Laos prior to this?
No, but I'm sure there was a ranger company across the company street from us. I'm sure they were there. We only stayed a couple of days, then we were relieved by the South Vietnamese Army. And then we flew back into Khe Sanh and then back to our base at Quan Tri. And then we operated out of Quan Tri. And we took a lot of casualties among the helicopter pilots and crew chiefs because it was, you know, they had a lot of anti-aircraft. And we went up in there to bring out pilots and things like this. But by that time, my tour in Vietnam was coming to an end, and I left Quan Tri near the middle of February, and then I came home and I was discharged in late February 1971 because I had come under that 150-day drop, as they called it.
You got an early out.
Got an early out, that's what I was looking for.
Now, did you encounter a lot of problems with dysentery, dengue fever,
I had malaria.
You had malaria?
I had malaria. Yeah, I was in a hospital a little while with that. And I lost a lot of weight. But it wasn't, there was two types of malaria, and I had the less dangerous type.
How about among the men in the unit, too?
It wasn't a real big problem because you had to take the malarial pills, these big orange pills, and there was a white one we took too. And as a medic, it was my responsibility to make sure the guys took it. And I had a little roster, you know, to make sure that they took that.
Was there much problem with jungle rot, trench foot, etc.?
Not with our unit so much because, first of all, we were not in the Delta region.
Right, you were in
the mountains, you know. And secondly, as an air rifle platoon cavalry troop, we were in the field, but we didn't stay for long periods of time. You know, we stayed in 2 days, 3 days, maybe at the most. Come out and then go to another area, you know, that type of thing. So we weren't out there long enough really to have those type of problems.
As a medic, were you aware of much drug usage, etc.?
Drug use was rampant. By the time I was in Vietnam, 70, 71, you know, early 71. I remember this curious story about we had a new platoon leader come in, a new lieutenant, and he'd come from the 4th Infantry Division that had begun to stand down, but he had time left. And he was a real good guy, and when he first came to me, he said, Doc, how many of the guys here are doing drugs? And I said, well, sir, I'm not, and I'm not sure about you, because all the rest were. You know, they were, cocaine was being used long before it ever got big over here. You can see the vials all over the place. Yeah, there's a lot of drug use, lots of it.
How about relationships between the men in the unit and civilians? Did you have much contact with civilians?
Not up there, because the villages were in the lowlands, and we were in the mountains.
Okay.
So we very seldom came across any civilians. If you were out near Quezon or the Rock Pile or places like that, or the Tri-Border region, I mean, that was the enemy. They were out there. That was the Ho Chi Minh Trail coming down through. You know, there weren't any civilians in that part.
Did you have much relationships with the South Vietnamese Army?
Sometimes we worked with them, but we didn't trust them. Because when we planned operations, it was they were told at the last moment, because I guess experience told the officers that if you brought them in on the early stages of planning, the enemy found out about it real quick, one way or another. Although the individual South Vietnamese soldiers are pretty good, I mean, we worked with them, the privates and the corporals and their sergeants, and their junior officers, like their lieutenants and captains, because they took a lot of the crap out there.
Yeah.
How about racial relationships within the unit?
Within the unit, it was okay because you were close-knit, but race was a real problem over there, for whatever reason. But it was mostly a problem in the rear area type units where boredom set in quickly. The supply units, the truck driving units and things like that. But in the combat units it wasn't so much. At least in my experience anyway, because we had a lot of racial minorities. We had Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, African Americans, and white guys. We all just kind of stuck together. So it really wasn't a problem within the unit itself. Too busy trying to survive the whole thing.
How do you think drug usage affected the unit's work in the field? Do you think it did that, or?
Well, there was an unwritten rule that while you were in the field that there was no drugs. However, sometimes we get called to go find a pilot or do a quick, insertion, and some of the guys were hiring kites, and they went with you, and they tended to do, crazy stuff like, we'll take on the entire North Vietnamese army or something. They go rushing off in different directions, and it wasn't good like that. But generally, the rule was, if we knew about where we were going, they didn't do the drugs. It's not that everybody did, but the temptation was there. These guys would do it.
Now, you received a Bronze Star.
Yes.
And the Army
Commendation
medals.
Yeah.
What did you receive those for?
They were more for meritorious service. You did your job, you did it well. There was no V devices on them. I didn't get them for valor or anything like that.
Did you receive the combat medic?
Yes, because I was under fire. I treated, yes.
Okay.
But the Bronze Star and the Army Commendation Medal were given for honorable service, meritorious service, and stuff like that. Yeah.
When did you leave Vietnam?
Probably about February 20th, 1971, because I was discharged on the 25th.
Okay. When you came back to the States, did you encounter any anti-war demonstrators?
No. I went to Fort Lewis, Washington. Then they discharged me, and I flew home. And
you wore civilian clothes?
no, I wore my uniform. You're required to wear a dress green uniform home. Yeah.
But you had no encounters?
Not really. I mean, I was dead tired. I slept most of the time. And I arrived at Albany Airport and called my dad and lived in Ticonderoga, and they came down and got me. But by that time, while I was in Vietnam, I applied for graduate school and had been accepted. So I knew that I had a place where I was going to do. And so I got to Ticonderoga, and I went to work in the IP mill up there for a few months, earned some more money, and I used a GI Bill, and then I went on to graduate school.
Were you aware of the anti-war movement?
Not in Vietnam, no. After I got back, while I was actually in graduate school, I learned a lot more about it. And
were there any reactions to you as a veteran on campus?
I just kept it to myself. I wasn't overly concerned about what I was or not. I was just busy trying to get that master's degree. Although one of the professors went to his first class, and he taught African American history in a graduate course, and he just calling the roll, and you know, your Army training comes back quick, you know. He says, Fosco, Carl, and I said, sir, here, sir. And afterwards, he'd been in the Army. He said, you must have been in the Army. And I said, yes. You know, and he was a good guy. He wasn't one of these crazy guys. And so he and I got along very well after that.
Okay.
But I didn't encounter any of that stuff.
When, why did you decide to go into the reserves? You went in 1975?
Right.
Why did you decide to go?
Well, they were always looking for, see, the reserves was a hideout spot for guys who didn't want to go to Vietnam, the Guard and the Reserve. But with Vietnam winding down, they lost, you know, lots and lots of people. So they kept sending me these little postcards. And then they had this 1 year and try it for Vietnam veterans. And they give you back your rank. By that time I was a sergeant. And when I was discharged. And I had just gotten married, I had a little baby, and so the income looked okay. And it was right in Glens Falls, and I lived in Hudson Falls at the time, well, I still do. And so I joined, and I did it for a couple years, and then I finally said, well, it's not too bad, I'll stay with this. And all of a sudden I had over 30 years of total service, because I never really had a break in service. I was in the individual ready reserve after you get out of the 2-year requirement. And so my total military service is over 33 years. And I stayed with the reserve, different units, moved my way up in rank, and then I retired as a sergeant major back in 2002. And I started a 30-year teaching career at the same time. I retired from that too.
Okay, is there anything you want to tell us about your time in the reserves at all, or?
Well, when I first joined, it was, of course, the Vietnam War was winding down. In fact, it pretty much wound down by 75. And a lot of the reservists that were in there at the time, especially the younger ones who had, you know, were dodging, basically they're dodging the Vietnam War. They thought we were crazy. You know, why you joined the reserves for? What do you want to do this for? And all that. So that made a difference, because the guys, there was quite a few of us Vietnam veterans actually. What we were going through was the Army's drill sergeant school. That seemed intriguing. And a lot of us were Vietnam veterans, and we decided to just, I guess, do it. You know, so we were there for the reason of we wanted to be there, as opposed to a lot of guys who didn't. In fact, several of those men, and a couple were good friends of mine now, stayed the entire time and retired as, you know, sergeant first class, master sergeants, first sergeants, and I retired as a sergeant major. So a lot of us went in and stayed, and most of us were draftees who had gone in but decided, you know, reserves might be a good idea, why throw it away, right? And so over the years, it was a Cold War mentality at first, you know. They had, you know, the Full the Gap exercises in Germany, you know, and then it slowly transitioned. In the peacetime army of the 80s, and then the Gulf War came up. I was in a unit that was scheduled to go to the Gulf War in 1991, but it lasted so short a time that we stood down, although we sent about 30 of our guys over. And then I stayed in until just shortly up before this began. But by that time I met my maximum years of service, and so I retired in 2002 before everything broke out with this war.
Do you ever read much on Vietnam?
Oh yes, yes. You know, because you're a small cog, you don't know what's really going on. And over the years, I got the Time Life series, you know, in Vietnam. Maybe you're familiar with that. And I read lots and lots of books on it, and histories, and not just the military side, but the political side. It was a Bright Shining Lie.
Yes.
Yeah, if you ever read that. And there was, you know, I read Colonel Hackworth's book, and lots of different ones. You know.
How about any of the movies?
At first I didn't, you know, because a lot of the movies were just totally unrealistic or just plain stupid. Like everybody thinks A Deer Hunter's a great movie, you know. And if you've been in the military at all, you realize that the hero of the whole thing is a draftee, but how does he become a staff sergeant? He's a special forces, and he has a beard. Now that isn't the Army, okay, you know, special forces soldier especially goes through long periods of training, and he's an enlistee, and he's in for a long time. You know, it wasn't realistic. I saw one movie it was on, I think it came on TV or maybe got as a video. I don't know if it was Platoon or another one, but it was much more realistic. And my wife told me that I was squirming in the chair with the realistic battle scenes and things like that. And there was one more recently there.
We were young men.
We were young, and so we were young,
We were
and soldiers
sold,
was.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I read the book,
Mhm.
and then the movie came out, and of course that's too cheap to go to the movie theater. So I waited, it came out on video, and I saw that. That was very, very realistic, you know, as far as I was concerned.
How do you, what do you think about Jane Fonda with her apologies and so on?
I think she was just a very young, naive woman. I think in later years, in retrospect, she understood that, you know, you can be anti-war, but you can be, you know, you need to be careful of the people, the troops and things like that. They're put in harm's way, and a lot of times not because they want to. I think the difference in this war on terror is you'll note a lot of people support the troops, but they may not support the war. And also the first President Bush in the first Gulf War, and then this Gulf War, when you mobilize the Guard and the Reserve like they've done, and they've had to, you make it everybody's war. In Vietnam, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference.
Okay.
You said you made use of the GI Bill after you got out?
Yeah, for graduate school.
Okay. Did you ever join any veterans organizations?
Yes, I'm a member of the, life member of the VFW and the American Legion.
Do you go to any meetings or?
Well, I'm active in both.
Okay,
I'm an officer in both organizations.
most are not.
Yeah, I've been past commander of VFW and treasurer in American Legion. I just got elected the first vice commander and that stuff. In fact, we're involved in a big, huge project in Glens Falls to raise money to upgrade our veterans monument.
How do you think your time in service changed or had an effect on your life?
Well, it gave you a totally different, it gives you a different perspective, you know. For instance, when I began teaching, most teachers began teaching, they begin teaching right out of college. You know, they've had their little summer jobs and things like this, and they teach for the next 35 years. And they have had no real life experience when it comes down to it, and they're teaching kids about, you know, well, I taught social studies and history. And so that gave me a much more deeper perspective on that whole thing. And plus, I was a little older when I started teaching because I had worked, you know, I worked in industry, I'd worked different places, and I'd been in the military. And so I was different in that respect. And so when I taught about, you know, history, I don't care if it was the Roman Empire or right down to modern times, you know, when I talk about wars, so kids tend to look at war as kind of like a big game, where I was a little more realistic about it. And it does give you a different perspective. Maturity, I guess.
Did you stay in contact with any of the fellows you served with in Vietnam?
No, but thanks to the internet, there's a guy called me out of the blue one day. He was with me as a medic in Vietnam, and he's a battalion chief of the Los Angeles Fire Department today. And he must have been searching the internet, saw my name, and he knew I was from upstate New York, and he called me one night. And we talked for a while, and then we exchanged email. And then on another website, I saw a guy's name who had served in Vietnam with me, and I have email contact with him occasionally. You know, we just trade, like, you know, grandchildren stories now. He lives out in Ohio, and he's a mechanic for Campbell Soup Company.
Wow. Any reunions or anything that you've attended?
Well, I haven't attended any reunions.
Okay.
I really don't have any great desire to do it, but I joined a couple associations, and they send me reunion material, you know, if you'd like to go. It just really doesn't appeal.
Okay.
Okay. If you hold this up and...
And when was that photograph taken?
In 1997.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Okay. All right, thank you for your interview.
Okay.